Hi guys, and welcome to today's topic, which is the life auction. We used to do a series of summer conferences in Romania on various philosophical topics, and of course we haven't been able to do that since the pandemic, and we ran some of them on Zoom, but of course it's not the same as being up in the mountains with your mates and staying up all night and doing what people do. But anyway, it was something, and so this is I've sort of summarised one of those Zoom talks, and it kicks off as so many of these things do, with a song called The Life Auction. And I hope I'm not breaking any copyright by uploading it, but anyway, I found this version of the song on YouTube already, and I've added some graphics and subtitles and all that, and I used this particular version of the song because it's by a group called The Straubs, because of Dave Cousins' introduction, where he explains why he wrote it, how he came to write it, what it's actually about, and so I commend that to you for your enjoyment. And the original song was from an album called Ghosts, which I'm sure you could track down on a well-known online retailer near you. Got a couple of good tracks on it. So anyway, here we are. I'll hand you over to Dave Cousins, and don't go away. Don't go away. I will be back. If you're not the sort of person who likes to philosophise to music, then still don't go away, but you can fast forward, and I'll see you in 7 minutes. Bye for now.
Thanks very much. This song was written about an old lady that I knew very well. Gorgeous old lady, greyed hair, typical granny that you could wish to have. Cheeks as soft as velvet. And tragically she died. And then the whole terrible thing started to happen. Her lovely house that she lived in, that she treasured all of the years, all of her ornaments, all of her pictures, the whole house came up for auction. And I went to the auction, and everything I remembered about that house was numbered, a little number on it. Went there at 9 o'clock in the morning. The house was crowded, and the auctioneer started going round the house number by number. And by 1 o'clock, people were walking out of that house with that dear old lady's possessions. The whole house was stripped bare by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was almost as though a whole pack of vultures had descended on that dear old lady's house. Row upon row of drab colourless houses, bowing low before high-rise blocks. Varicosed housewives with sweaty armpits, scrimping and scrubbing their husbands' socks. A limp, polluted flag flutters sadly in its death throes, while crippled trees in leg aisles wearily haul themselves through another diluted acid day. The vultures stood outside the gate, quite unaware that fate is never kind to those who wait in vain. Their pride betrays the means of their destruction. But leave my eyes with giving light. My tongue is gives me to speak. The rest is yours, and welcome. The rest is yours, and welcome. as always having taught them indeed. Their greed betrayed their total lack of conscience. Take my things and drink it bright, but leave my eyes which give me light, my tongue which gives me leave to speak. The rest is yours, and welcome. The rest is yours, and welcome. Sometimes cross, but he has never failed to count the cost of passion. Desire to explain to me of his existence. I think I'm drinking right, but in my eyes which give me light, my tongue which gives me leave to speak. The rest is yours, and welcome. The rest is yours, and welcome. Pride, pride, greed, greed, desire.
What is for human worth? What are you worth? Well, I guess it depends worth to whom. To the state, for example, you do have a monetary value which can be calculated. For example, in the UK, we have a thing called QALYs, Quality Adjustable Life Years. If we're deciding whether a new and expensive medication should be made available free on the NHS, we have to work out whether it's worth it, how much extra good life will it give you. And the break-even point is about £20,000 per quality adjusted life years. And this is entirely sensible. If you give me one of these new expensive drugs for kidney cancer, which may give me an extra 3 months of life, that means you won't get either of your arthritic hips replaced. What you spend on me is no longer available to be spent on you. But this calculation is irrelevant to my original question, what is the human worth? Because that's a question which doesn't have an answer in money terms. So why was it Dave Cousins wrote a song about an auctioneer? I mean, I don't suppose he was trying to suggest that auctioneers are the worst people in the world. I'm sure it's just an example which could apply to any of us. But what he was worrying about in that song was that the auctioneer was trampling on the sacred, the holiness of the old lady's memory. The old lady was just a thing. She had lost her humanity. She was just a physical shell. In fact, worse than that, she was just a financial asset. Well, the dear old lady had died. So he had to do something with her stuff. But what upset Dave Cousins was that to the hard-headed auctioneer, the old lady was now just a corpse, a thing, no longer part of the story. And the sooner he could clear her stuff, the better it would be for everyone, both in terms of time and money. The stuff itself had no significance beyond its monetary value. I presume from the way the story was told that the old lady had no living relatives who, you might hope, had at least would have found some memory or something significant in some of her possessions. For that matter, it wouldn't have been such a bad fate if some of the items were bought by a complete stranger, if that stranger could at least cherish those objects for their own intrinsic beauty or something along those lines. What, though, if valuable paintings, for example, were bought by an art dealer, not to hang on his own wall so he could admire them, but to lock away in a secure vault where no one could see them, in the hopes that they might become more valuable one day in the future? In other words, if these things became just a commodity, these sorts of things happen. Or am I being too sentimental, imagining that a particular arrangement of quarks, the old lady's stuff, could ever be a window into something important beyond? Maybe, though, it's more naive to think that quarks could be anything other than such a window. There's a particular political philosophy which prevails pretty much everywhere these days, neoliberalism. Everything is calculated only in terms of its monetary value. It hasn't always been like this. This really came in force in the 1980s. But I fear this is an attitude which infects our own thinking morally. In the song, the auctioneer is presented as a sort of caricature of this sort of thing. But any theory, political, religious, economic, revolutionary, whatever, if it raises itself up above the human being, it can have horrible effects, and often does. I'd like to read you a little poem. There we go. Every person is holy, especially my neighbour. Ideas and texts are not holy. They live in the world of the air and swoop down upon us. Sometimes we can use them in the service of the holy, but so often ideas and texts, secular and sacred, are used to oppress and control, as if they were more important than my neighbour. But they are servants. As Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So going back to the auction and the old lady's stuff, can physical things, or abstract things for that matter, art, goodness, maths, can these things ever be a window onto that which is beyond, the divine, if you want to put it like that? What about people? Can we be windows onto the divine? What about Dave Cousins' old lady? Was she a window? Is she still a window onto the divine, the beyond? What about the poor, the destitute, the disabled, the unwanted, the other? Well, Hitler didn't think so. So what about him? Is even he a window? Maybe the beyond is all around us. And there are countless windows to look through, including you. So, can you put a price on human life? What constitutes price or value? How can the way we value others be distorted? Well, every writer in the New Testament warned us of the dangers of money. Sadly, we do need money because not having money is extremely stressful, but it is dangerous stuff. It gives us a false scale of value. The most important things in life, love, beauty, are weightless. They don't have a commercial value at all. Money ties us into the mundane and blinds us to the transcendent. We have to occupy our minds worrying about it. Investments, insurance, pensions, all that sort of thing. It distorts our politics. It distorts our religion. It encourages us to focus on ourselves rather than the other, unless, that is, we give our money away, and that is a lot more difficult than not having it in the first place. People, relationships become commodities. It destroys our world. It makes us treat animals and the environment as commodities too, instead of the wondrous things they are, with their own intrinsic value. C.S. Lewis, who wrote many, many marvelous things, well worth reading any of his stuff you can get hold of. But he wrote it's a short essay in 1952. It's actually an introduction to somebody else's book, but you can find it in there's various collections of his essays. This one's called The Empty Universe, and I've edited it down a little bit. In it, he describes the process of how we came to eradicate magic, first from nature and then from ourselves. Actually, it's also one of the themes, one of the many themes that's behind Lord of the Rings. How we first no longer believed in dryads, the spirits of the trees, and now we don't even believe in our own souls. And that's how we've ended up, well, some of us have ended up in a very bleak place. It's called The Empty Universe. At the outset, the universe appeared packed with will, intelligence, life, positive qualities. Every tree is a nymph and every planet is a god. Man himself is akin to the gods. The advance of knowledge gradually empties this rich and genial universe, first of its gods, then of its colours, smells, sounds and tastes, finally of all solidity itself, as solidity was originally imagined. All these items are taken from the world and are transferred to the subjective side of the account, classified as our sensations, thoughts, images, emotions. But the matter does not rest there. The same method which has emptied the world now proceeds to empty ourselves. We were just as mistaken, and mistaken in much the same way, when we attributed souls or selves or minds to human organisms as when we attributed dryads to the trees. We who have personified all other things turn out to be ourselves mere personifications. Man is indeed akin to the gods, that is, he is no less of a ghost than they. Just as the dryad is a ghost, an abbreviated symbol for all the facts we know about the tree, foolishly mistaken for a mysterious entity over and above the facts, so the man's mind, or consciousness, is an abbreviated symbol for certain verifiable facts about his behavior, a symbol mistaken for a thing. And just as when we've been broken out of our bad habit of personifying trees, so we must now be broken out of our bad habit of personifying men. There never was a subjective account into which we could transfer the items which the object had lost. There is no consciousness to contain, as images or private experiences, all the lost gods, colours, concepts. What we thought we were loving when we loved a woman or a friend was not even a phantom, like the phantom sail which starving sailors think they see on the horizon. It was something much more like a pun, a string of words masquerading as language. And thus, we arrive at a result uncommonly like zero. Now, the trouble with this conclusion is not that it's simply unwelcome to our emotions. The real difficulty for most of us is that we find it impossible to keep our minds twisted into the shape that this philosophy demands. And to do him justice, David Hume, who is its great ancestor, warned us not to try. He recommended backgammon instead, and freely admitted that when, after a suitable dose, we returned to our theory, we should find it cold, strained, and ridiculous. And obviously, if we really must accept nihilism, that is how we shall have to live. Just as if we have diabetes, we must take insulin. But one would rather not have diabetes and do without the insulin. If there should, after all, turn out to be any alternative to a philosophy that can be supported only by repeated and increasing doses of backgammon, I suppose most people would be glad to hear of it. Well, I guess I don't believe in dryads either. And I'm not suggesting, recommending returning to a kind of pagan nature worship. But on the other hand, the opposite extreme, which is what we have now, is clearly demonic, where everything just exists for us to exploit because it only exists as a price tag. This leads to the evils of industrial farming, the exploitation of humans. A large and long-term study has recently been carried out at Harvard, followed 730 men right through their lives, right up to the bitter end. And each year they were asked what made them happy. And throughout the study, the subjects expected their happiness would depend on wealth, achievement, fame. But it actually turned out that the happiest and also the healthiest were those who had prioritized their relationships, family, friends, community. Yeah, money is a strange thing. In a very real sense, it doesn't exist. It's just a personification of a faith that we've all agreed to share, a bit like a religion. And like a religion, it can wield immense power over us. And it is, after all, a very efficient way of organizing things. It'll probably work even better without people getting in the way with our glorious irrationality. But is, or how, can earning money be made compatible with living a good life? Well, as I said, we do need money. The lack of it can be very stressful. And to be honest, the New Testament advice on this isn't terribly helpful, because somehow you've got to find a balance. And that's going to be different for each of us. Jesus said, where your money is, there will your heart be also. And he also said, you cannot serve both God and money. Now, you may not particularly want to serve God, so instead replace that word with a word which is more suitable for you, whatever your true passion is. So life's a balance, a compromise. Do you look for a job where your passion is? Or would you be content with something more mundane, allowing you more freedom to follow your passion as you wish, but of course, without the money or the support? Same thing if you're planning to go to uni. What type of course do you choose? Something which is boring but will lead to a steady job, or something which is fascinating just for its own sake? In other words, do you go for law or astrophysics? Do you prioritize time or income? In other words, do you work full-time or part-time? Well, when you start out, you'll have to work full-time and probably work fairly hard. But once you've gained a bit of experience and credibility in your particular field, you may find you do have choices, even if that means swimming against the tide a bit. Do you prefer a payroll job or to be self-employed? Well, there's pros and cons to all these alternatives. Anyway, that's enough from me now. Would appreciate it very much if you could leave some sort of comments, positive or negative, so I can gauge whether it'll be helpful to do some more of these talks on all sorts of different topics, actually. So hopefully see you again soon. Bye for now.